Peel has always played an important role in the Christian heritage of the Isle of Man. It's claimed that St. Patrick himself stepped ashore here on the small island that now bears his name. What we can say with more certainty is that by the 10th century, Christian buildings were already in use on St. Patrick's Isle. The church, the chapel, and the round tower were being constructed. By the 13th century, the impressive structure of St. German's Cathedral dominated the Isle, and for the next 5 centuries it was to be the centre of religious life in the Isle of Man. By the 18th century, however, it had fallen into disrepair and was eventually abandoned, and for the next 200 years the Isle of Man was without a cathedral, with the small chapel at Bishop's Court standing in as a pro-cathedral. Meanwhile, in 1879, work had started on a new parish church in Peel, which was intended to be the island's cathedral. However, due to various political delays, it was to be another 100 years before this plan was realised. Finally, on the 1st of November 1980, St. German's Parish Church was officially made the Isle of Man's Anglican Cathedral. In recent years, though, it's gradually become apparent that to serve the needs of a modern community and the changing patterns of worship, a dramatic restructuring of the building was necessary. The Very Reverend Nigel Godfrey sums up the challenge.
We're in a position where we can't really afford to do this project, and we can't afford not.
Beginning in July 2023, after years of planning, an ambitious scheme was started, involving creating new entrances to the cathedral, replacing the existing floor with a new flat floor with sustainable underfloor heating, replacing the furnishings and installing new services and equipment, and opening up areas to provide new spaces in the building. This was to be a multi-million-pound project which will provide a hub for the arts, spaces for corporate events and hospitality, provisions for education, and, most importantly of all, a place of worship.
It came about because the cathedral needs to do so many things to make it usable, really, in our current age. That's the first primary thing. But we've kind of given it a title, Treasuring the Past, Serving the Present, and Sustainability in the Future. So there's those 3 elements to it, really. One is about the past, is to protect the historic value of the building, to enhance it in many ways. But serving the present is about enabling it to be used round the clock as a building, as opposed to just for 2 services a day, and then Sundays with their services and so on, and the odd exhibition and so on. We need to make it work for its living. And in terms of the future, we need to make sure we meet our goals of carbon neutrality by the year 2030, and that actually it has flexibility for changes in the future.
Alistair Biggott, a member of the Cathedral project team and a retired civil engineer, explains how this project began.
The first stage was to clear the pews, which had been used for virtually 140 years. These would be replaced by new chairs, which would provide a more flexible and usable space. Some of the original pews were sold to raise funds, but mostly the beautiful Manx oak was repurposed for use within the project.
The valuable silver plate and other historic objects were removed into safekeeping, and work started to remove the old floor. The beautiful pitch pine floorboards were carefully removed and donated to the restoration of Bishop's Court. The original cast iron heating pipes were broken up and removed from the site. The pipes were full of years of rust and grime. It turned out that the voids beneath the floor were much deeper in one or two places than had been expected, as site manager Don Jeff explains.
We had to dig out, level it, roll it, then fill it with hardcore everywhere, which took approximately 300 tonne of Type 1 hardcore that was all barreled in by hand. Again, that took quite a while. A pile of hardcore that's 300 tonne is quite a big pile.
To make the new floor, with its underfloor heating, 13 different layers were required. This layer of hardcore was the first and laid with laser precision. The oak panelling around the edges of the nave was removed and renovated off-site to be replaced later. This was the ethos of the project, to, wherever possible, reuse as much of the high-quality materials that were already within the building. Meanwhile, the old floor in the north vestry was removed, making way for a complete reordering of the vestry into a new chapel with a new mezzanine floor above. Blockwork was installed to support the existing wood panelling, and a new floor would be installed to work with the underfloor heating system.
A new doorway was created from the south transept into the original south vestry in order to be turned into and transformed into a new commercial kitchen. The creation of this new doorway, with supporting steel pins, was a dry run for the much bigger opening that would be created in the south transept south wall. The unfortunate discovery of wet rot in the flooring below the new kitchen area meant a new floor had to be constructed in hardcore and concrete.
Some 10 kilometres of cabling was installed, supporting the new audio-visual system, a hearing loop, new LED lighting, video cameras and Wi-Fi. This required masses of cabling that had to be hidden from view. The solution was to provide a network of floor ducts below the underfloor heating system, and deep cable trays that are concealed behind the skirting of the perimeter wall cladding. It was necessary to replace a lot of the archaic cabling and inefficient lighting, but access wasn't always easy. Being a building of considerable historic importance, there were a number of conservation planning conditions that had to be taken into account. The conservation officer insisted that the original tiled aisles between the pew platforms be retained, as they formed part of the historic fabric of the building. The solution was to take the new heating system and limestone flooring over the top of the existing aisles. While the tiles would be hidden from view, they would remain intact for future generations to rediscover if the floor was ever taken up. After the hardcore stage was completed, trenches were dug to lay the large insulated pipes that will carry the water for the underfloor heating. One of the most daring alterations, and certainly the most nerve-wracking for those involved, was to create a new entrance doorway in the south transept to link to the cathedral gardens. This would involve cutting away the stonework beneath a priceless stained glass window and hoping it didn't collapse. This wall had been bulging outwards over a period of years, and structural engineer John Gray explains how this wall was first of all stabilised.
About 5 years ago, Syntic anchors, which are stainless steel rods, were inserted into the wall, both along the length of the wall and at right angles to the wall. So the whole of the south transept wall was stabilised with these pins. We were then reasonably confident that nothing would fall down while they were working underneath.
What was a game changer was the use of a masonry chainsaw. This allowed the contractor to cut holes through the width of the almost metre-thick walls without causing any vibration. So, 5 square holes were cut right through the sandstone and steel beams were inserted called needles. These temporary beams were then supported by acrows resting on the floor and the purpose-built external foundations. This temporary structure of needles and acrows supported the masonry and stained glass window whilst the permanent beams were installed. The saw neatly cut through the masonry, which was then removed by hand to form the new opening.
And to see if emergency works were required.
3 supporting steel beams were then installed and mouldings formed in plywood to create the new concrete sides of the doorway. The void between the stone and the new beams was dry packed to create a very strong new permanent opening.
It was definitely stressful because although the window is priceless, let's say, and we didn't want it falling, more than that, the men had to work underneath it whilst it was propped, which was very stressful because you've got that added worry. I mean, okay, the window's worth a lot of money, but not as much as one of the men.
John Gray was very pleased with the results.
And the whole thing went like a dream, and there was no movement. Yeah, it's going to be there for a long time now.
The original oak panelling was put back, and where needed, new pine panelling was installed, which would later be stained to match the oak. It was important that any new joinery installations had to blend in seamlessly with the existing fabric of the building. The boiler room was modified to enable the existing gas boilers to work with the new underfloor heating system. Energy-efficient air source heat pumps will eventually replace the gas boilers. Attention now returned to the floor. It was time for more layers, and the next to be laid was made of glaipor, a foam glass aggregate. It's made from 100% recycled glass, which has been aerated, creating gas-filled pores, which makes it light and gives it excellent thermal properties. 120 bags of glaipor arrived from Wales. It had to be laid by hand, compacted and checked for level by laser. There were still 10 more layers to make up the floor. After the glaipor, there was a geotech membrane laid, which was covered with a bonding material. A 3-legged robot working in conjunction with lasers helped create a completely level surface. White cement sheets were then placed to allow access to the floor without disturbing it. Insulation was then put in place, followed by a layer of aluminium sheets, to which some 5 kilometres of pipes were clipped to carry the heating water. A further membrane was laid, and the floor was then entirely covered with thermally transparent tiles, which allow the heat from the pipes to be transferred to the final floor surface. The project was now into December, and the temperature in the cathedral was approaching 5 degrees, which was the absolute limit for laying the terracotta tiles. Just before Christmas, Nigel was able to show important donors and friends how the project was going. Kevin Christian, joint project manager, explains where the funding came from to enable this project to happen.
Funding for the cathedral reordering presented its own set of challenges. For example, the strong competition from the many local charities for access to a relatively small pool of donors. Also, the cathedral's exclusion from diverse funding lines available in the UK by virtue only of its establishment under Manx law.
At this stage, there was a visit from the children of the nearby clothworkers' school, who were invited to write their names on the tiles. Local residents were also able to inscribe their names, thereby creating a time capsule for future generations to discover. There was snow outside, but the cold didn't stop the workers from progressing onwards, making good the new openings.
COVID had a major impact on the cost of stone for the cathedral floor. The closure of the German quarry contracted to supply the 24 tons of limestone needed, resulted in both a delay in delivery and a 10% increase in cost.
These tiles were carefully laid along with the challenge of cutting the unique shapes around the base of the columns. A striking feature of the new floor is the series of special tiles featuring the names of the bishops that have served in the diocese since the early 12th century right up to the present day. These tiles were shot blasted locally by hand in Castletown. Some of the items that had been in store since the work began were put back in their rightful place. The area that will form a focal point within the cathedral has had a raised area created with finely cut limestone slabs marking out the area. These finely cut stones were made especially for this project and are engraved with the parishes of man. The biggest of these stones weighed in excess of 300 kilograms, and each stone had to be placed with absolute precision to get the levels and angles to perfection. A special fabric was then put down for the area to be finished off with more limestone tiles. To finish the main floor, after being grouted, the tiles are entirely covered with a special coating to protect them and the names of the many bishops who have served the island over the past 7 centuries from the wear of the many feet that will pass over them in the years to come. Very specialised work to repair some of the damage done to the stonework around the doorways was completed, and other detailed finishing touches were carried out in the treasury. The official opening of the first phase of this ambitious project was attended by the patron of the Cathedral Development Appeal, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal.
We have come together to celebrate the reordering of St. German's Cathedral, to pray with our partners for the future of this cathedral as a place of worship and outreach.
At a celebratory service attended by the many people connected with the project, Her Royal Highness was asked to unveil a plaque marking the completion of this first phase. The challenge now is to continue the fundraising to install the advanced audio-visual equipment, Wi-Fi systems and new lighting. The challenge continues.